Welcome to With Thunders Plus, a podcast where two friends get together and talk about the ideas and events that will shape our uncertain future. I'm your host, Steve, along with my co host, Zach, and tonight is Shooting the Poodoo 7. Did you have a clever subtitle or no?
Mandalor and Doomercore.
Mand'alor and Doomercore. That's right. You did have a catchy title.
Did have a good one.
I still am a fan of Electric Poodoo.
Electric Poodoo was good. Yeah, it sounds really funny. I always dreamt of having a job where I can make up, silly titles for things. So
let's
get this shit going.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And hopefully, as folks are starting to realize, Shooting the Poodoo is a later night stream, so we're already well upon our way of our vices.
There was a thing called Sip Hop. It started off this whole series of hops as an art hop, and it quickly expanded outward to alcohol because all the downtown businesses need our attention. And so we went ahead and went to a few breweries before going home. And here we are.
Here we are.
Pretty fun.
If you noticed, if you can see, I don't know, my camera's fucking fading shit out. There
cameras don't like glass, but that is a Celebration IPA, if that is indeed what is in the pint.
It's just a fucking Sierra Nevada pint glass, bro.
Wow, there we go.
They're a dime a dozen where in my neck of the woods.
I've got probably a dozen.
Yeah.
The various events and whatnot.
Yeah, I think the last few I got to replace the ones we broke were at like Safeway for like a fucking $1 a piece.
Nice.
Just at the supermarket, I'm like, I'll pay $1 for a pint glass. Give me 3.
That's a great deal. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll fucking hell yeah. And then these, then they last for years, right? Until you accidentally fucking clank it too hard,
or the design gets worn off after a while, and you're like, it's still pint glass.
Celebration's fading, but guess what? Doesn't bother me that much.
It's still pint glass.
It's just a vessel for holding beer, which I'm happy to be drinking, by the way.
We got some great ones. There's a local brewery that teamed up with, I think it was just another brewery, and they made a special Simpsons themed line.
I don't doubt that.
We got so we have two pint glasses that aren't the normal, conical ones. They're just straight up and down, and they have Simpsons art going all the way around.
Cool.
Very cool. I like it.
Okay, so tonight we're talking about The Mandalorian, and then we are also gonna watch a YouTube short from Canadian Prepper and kind of like break down the shit he says. I could assume that would be most of our conversation, pretty free form. I might have thrown one or two sources for the show notes, but we don't have to go over them now.
Okay.
Or tonight rather. But I will say that it just takes too much goddamn time to provide contextual information and other things.
Mm-hmm.
We can try and make that happen as we go through it point by point. But yeah, without further ado, let's talk about The Mandalorian.
Let's indeed.
It's remarkable the difference between OBS and what's actually broadcasting. Because on OBS, you are like a blur of light. You're almost like a fucking...
I'm made of light.
Well, technically, you are made of light. That's pretty fucking heavy
condensed
shit
through
when you really get into it.
Yeah, when it's condensed through a slow vibration.
Yeah, exactly. I am. That's why I chose this background. Actually, you know why I chose this background? Because we were like... Brooke is like, is that a satellite? I was like, satellites aren't that bright. She's like, it's not a star, is it? It's like, I don't know. It probably, if it's not an airplane, and it's definitely not a satellite, it's way too bright. She's like, could it be a planet? I was like, yeah. Venus kind of looks like that. I don't pay that close of attention.
Venus and Jupiter were in the sky pretty heavily recently.
And Venus and the moon and Jupiter all lined up last night, and we didn't get to see Jupiter tonight. But we just saw from the smoking chair, right? We saw the moon and we saw a bright ass. We're like, it's probably Venus, is what I said. Because I was like, I think we saw Venus and Mars in the same sky a year and a half ago. But I was thinking we should definitely incorporate some fucking planetary alignment rituals into our liturgy.
Sure.
As we draft the book of rituals, we'll come up with a really rad name in the future, but it'll be our liturgical manual for our pagan church that we're going to start.
The Church of Cheese and Rice. Latter Day.
Cheese and rice, maybe.
Platter Day something. Has to rhyme with paints.
Oh Doesn't my God, that is fucking hilarious. Wait,
thank you.
The Church of Cheese and Rice.
The latter or the Platter Day. I mean, you could even say, the Platter Day Saints. It would still work.
No, Platter Day Saints. It's great. Church of Cheese and Rice, Platter Day Saints.
We will not get sued. I can assure you of this.
No, my friend. Maybe we should talk offline, because if it's going to be a fucking just an absurdity, then that's not really my objective for sure, right? Like, I think we should, like, it's a planetary alignment. We were talking about astrology the other day. It doesn't have to mean anything. Like, it doesn't have to have it's not a cause of some effect that we can observe.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean we can't also celebrate that fucking celestial dance. I think we were talking about last week, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically another way of observing time. Instead of looking down at your watch or your cell phone, you're looking up at the planets and going like, "Hey, it's that time again." This happens every 7 years. It's been 7 years since I saw this.
You celebrate an elder's birthday or some kind of milestone by being like, "This is your 10th time of this planetary alignment," and it turns out it happens fucking once every like 7.5 years or something. Right. Or you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I hope to make it through at least 2 Halley's Comets.
I'm sorry, what?
I said I hope to make it through at least 2 Halley's Comets. Might
that
require
5 years.
It's like 82, something along those lines. Yeah.
You're not gonna make it that long, bro.
No, man, I'm gonna make it because I'm gonna have a robot body. I'm gonna volunteer for some fringe science,
bro.
Fringe science, man. I will volunteer for that shit as I get older.
Second half of the show is far less Star Wars, galaxy far, far away with high tech, and much more. What is the reality of the situation?
I am whatever was inside of that weird droid. Oh, spoilers! The weird droid in episode 2, because that was organic inside of a suit for sure. It was like that was an organic eye.
Yeah, I don't know if they just kind of like introduced that because it seems like a cool idea, and then they.
I think it's probably that. I
don't think it's relevant to the plot of this season.
No, and that's what's terrible because it is so interesting. But I saw people talking about it being a Dianaga. It kind of looks like the Dianaga eye that comes up in episode 4.
Do you? So we're obviously on our first topic. Yeah. Do you, my friend, think that Zach Baca?
Yes. So
do you think that the series should be organized in like 2 or 3 or 4 episode arcs, a la the latter seasons of the Clone Wars, and honestly the latter seasons of Rebels also, and then Andor specifically? Like, do you think that The Mandalorian would benefit from having a more concrete narrative structure? I'm practicing my interviewing. I was watching Katie Sackhoff get interviewed the other day.
Yeah.
Or earlier today.
Oh, yeah.
She got interviewed. They do like a panel of people who talk about Star Wars, and they get to like actually interview people. It's pretty fucking rad. And most of the questions were solid.
She was also Battlestar Galactica.
She was, indeed. Yeah. Plus, she voiced Bo-Katan before she played her live action.
Oh, she was the Clone Wars actress?
She was the Clone Wars Bo-Katan,
Voice.
And she was in Rebels, too. Because she was an adult in Rebels. Remember when Sabine Darksaber?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good show.
Which is what the armorer referred to last season or the season before in The Mandalorian, where she's like, oh, he's like, oh, do you know Bo-Katan? He's like, Bo-Katan fucking fucked up everything for us because she didn't deserve the leadership position according to their like mythology or whatever, right? And I think now she's posited, and this is a total shift, and don't let me distract you from answering my question, but like riding the fucking mythosaur, swinging the fucking darksaber. If this fucking show turns out to be, if the Mandalorian is anybody but Din Djarin or Baby Grogu, I call bullshit. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, I think Grogu could wreck her shit. Given a few more, years of training. I do wonder. I do kind of wonder, like, if they would ever end up doing a time skip if the show continued past season 3, because like otherwise Grogu's just this helpless, thing the whole time, and we just get to look at him and go, "Oh, cute," and he might have the occasional moment of like, "Choo choo 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 choo," lightsaber or some shit like that. But like, wouldn't it be great to have a fully realized Grogu one day, maybe in its own series? Disney, do that. Maybe
Right.
maybe have
Where would
Wong
be
and,
like
and
Luke
Madison
was
come
fucking
on.
exiled on God damn it, the water
One
planet,
weird planet. Yeah, I forget what it's good.
which I thought was a fantastic planet.
Oh,
I thought
like,
they did a really good job, especially in the Last Jedi when they had like the nuns basically. Like it was like
yeah,
clearly a monastery, and the way they like made it a monastery but made it otherworldly.
yeah,
I thought that was great, and with the humor, right? Like she cuts the fucking rock and it tumbles and breaks the cart, and they're like,
that was
"Oh
pretty
fuck!"
good.
Like
So,
it's
let's
good.
be
Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
totally honest with you. Like my knowledge peaks at the original series, drops a little bit for the Clone Wars movies, not the cartoon or anything like that, and it plummets horribly when it comes to 7, 8, 9. Like I know very little about those ones.
You've seen them though,
I've seen
because
them,
we
yeah.
went and saw them together.
I know I've seen them, but like it doesn't mean I remember
Seen
every
it.
little thing about them. Which is to say, I saw it. No, I do
I was
remember.
probably the only person who watched The Last Jedi twice in the movie theater all the way through. I watched it once with you, and then I watched it with my girlfriend, or maybe that was the last movie. I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't know. I I haven't like had the urge to rewatch those ones hardly ever. So
No, they're tough, dude.
yeah, that's my knowledge drops you precipitously after that. Anyway, where were we? You were asking
I
me
was asking you a question
storytelling
about
arcs.
narrative pacing and would it benefit from like an arc structure? But it
Arc
doesn't feel like it
structure.
has it, does it?
No, and I would kind of appreciate the arc structure and maybe like fewer interruptions for like establishing what's going on elsewhere. I feel like there's a better
Oh,
show for
really?
that. Yeah, yeah. Like even though we met that doctor in the Mandalorian, I kind of wish that everything like lined up so you could actually put him in fucking Andor, as it feels more like that sort of style of story.
It
It's
was
more of the
100%.
intrigue. Yeah, yeah. And so it's like, hey, what's this? What's this that I'm watching? And like, it's not saying I didn't like it. I did like the little distraction and everything, but the whole time I was like, man, how much are they going to eat up of this episode for this? And then the payoff was like, I get that you have to build up to the the backstab, but like, come on, it took a long time and it ate up a lot of my my episode of the Mandalorian, so I wasn't horribly happy with that.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. I really enjoyed that. I thought as far as and of course we're talking about episode 3, season 3,
Yeah, skip ahead.
where it was basically like a sideshow of Dr. Pershing, right?
Yeah,
And it
less of that,
followed him for
please.
a while versus Din Djarin and Grogu and at this point Bo-Katan, right? Like
Yeah,
um and yeah, I really, really enjoyed that for its world building. Like, I haven't read a lot of the novel. Like, I've read a number of like expanded universe, like
right.
non-canon legend stuff now, but like
Mm,
those were like kind of like visualizations of world building that plaza with like the fucking mountain. And then of course they are like, oh look, Grogu escaped through all those same locations in the most recent episode, right?
mhm,
And so it's like, oh, cool. They like showed these locations, and then they like kind of like showed the galaxy was small in a way, but like, or like what transpires, right? Like, oh, Grogu escaped through that fucking train tunnel that they were going through on this kind of more benign thing. But at any rate, like, I always like my favorite scene in episode 2 is when first Anakin and Obi-Wan like go chase Zam Weasel. And after they try to assassinate Padme,
I remember
they
that.
go down into the Coruscant underworld, and then there were a bunch of arcs in the Clone Wars that had elements of Ahsoka or Anakin and Ahsoka or other characters solving mysteries or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. There were a number of arcs that like our main characters were taken into the Coruscant underworld, which helped build that. But I thought that that like little Pershing arc we had really carried a heavy load in terms of world building on Coruscant. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially
Well, I mean,
for people that are watching live action stuff but never really got into the animated stuff.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, that's where I sit. Like, I've seen each of the series once through, but I mean, I don't know. It was more of the same for me, so I didn't really enjoy most of the series for Clone Wars or Rebels, or that weird one where it's a kid racing against pirates for some reason.
Oh, that was
Resistance, I think.
Resistance, and
Yeah.
I couldn't get through the first season. It really for me, like I'm okay with a kind of childish story, right?
Yeah.
But it was for me that show, the animation style fucking killed it. Like I could not, like I would have to be seriously like. Have you watched some of the supplemental kind of things that came out? Like, did you watch the what the fuck did they call it? There were two animated. It was like Tales of the Jedi, which was a series of studios, but not Japanese studios. And then there was another one of like Star Wars-esque shorts that were like all by Japanese animation studios. Did you see that? What was that called?
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
Do you have Disney Plus?
Of course I have Disney Plus.
That's right. You're watching The Mandalorian.
Yeah.
No, there was a show. It wasn't Tales. That's why I wish we had a fucking audience, bro. Because then people could be like, "Oh, you're talking about
Comment,
this."
tell us.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I went. At any rate, yeah, no, they did a Japanese animation style, different from the Cartoon Network Clone Wars. That was really kind of interesting. And I forget why I was even bringing it up. But I do know I would appreciate an arc structure.
Yeah.
You sometimes get that.
Yeah, like
bit,
with well, you know, like this whole thing with Bo-Katan and Din and Grogu.
It's all moved like, so fast after not doing anything for so fucking long. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, I mean, I feel like this is doing a whole lot of nothing. Like you basically had an entire episode that was like, hey, like, so I'm looking at, you know, the first episode was Mandalorians fight big monster instead of retreat to cave, which is just dumb in my mind. Like, why didn't they just fall back? They hadn't even lost anyone when it first showed up. They could have just retreated. It's kind of bad tactics, honestly.
Show, my friend, it would be like Andor, where they spend fucking forever like hiding,
like shit,
hiding in plain sight, and it's a really fucking big deal when they actually execute the plan.
I mean, it basically should have been, you know, one of those things, you know, like, you know, where the dinosaur tries to get into the cave, but the dinosaur's head is too big, so it's like, it's really scary, but then you realize it can't get you, and then all the Mandalorians just unloaded on it.
You mean like when the Rancor?
Yeah.
Was reaching for Luke.
Yeah.
And he stabs the toe with the fucking bone.
Exactly. Yeah.
Gotta relate it back
everybody
to the
unloads.
Trilogy, bro.
Yeah, man. And then fucking all the Mandalorians just unload on this thing as it tries to get them inside an impenetrable cave. Come on, man, Mandalorians. Anyway. I just thought that was a little silly. And then it got repeated with the most recent episode where you had giant fly, you know, majigger. And both of them centered around, like, you know, earning respect, because, you know, he had been cast out and he needed to talk to somebody, so it's like, look, boo, 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 I did something good for you guys. And then same for Bo-Katan, you're rescuing Ragnar is his name.
Yeah, it is Ragnar.
Yeah, Ragnar.
Yeah, but you know what, after watching the most recent episode, I was like, okay, that was fun.
Yeah.
Right? Like some of them are kind of a burden. Like the episode 3, I was like, ooh, that's intriguing. And then episode 4, I was like, oh, that's fun. But like until the last episode that we watched, and we're a couple episodes behind of the Bad Batch, but like until then, like it's funny. I was telling Brooke, I was like, some of this stuff, like I know it's filler because me as a game master, like playing role playing, this feels like something you throw in when you're not sure how to move the plot forward, but you still got to play.
Oh
and so
no,
I'm like,
you need this thing for money.
all right, you got to take the frog lady. You're looking for this thing, and so like, oh, I don't know what to do. I'm not ready for them to introduce like this pivotal character for the PCs, right? Like, I'm not ready to introduce the remnants of the Night Owls and Bo-Katan on that one planet. It's like, all right, well, you got to get to that planet. I'm not sure what we're gonna do when we get there. All right, cool. So you're
Gotta get your
traveling
droid
through
buddy.
sublight space because you're giving a ride to someone. You got a paid passenger that just can't travel at hyperspace. So you got to do sublight speed. And imagine that. What happens when you travel at sublight speed? Oh, you wind up like having some kind of fucked up shit happen to you because sublight is fucking dangerous, right? Like. And then you're
he gets
like
hyperspace sickness,
shooting fucking spiders, and then you're like, oh, let's throw a little element, like some teaser element that like makes no fucking sense. Like the New Republic being like, oh yeah, we saw what you did, you're a good guy, even though we like literally shot you down and could have fucking killed you. I like a show though, man. It's no Andor though, but like I said, it told just about everybody. Andor like soured me on all things Star Wars because that's in my mind what Star Wars should be.
Yeah.
It should be a galaxy far, far away that you can tell really, really fucking compelling stories in, right? Like, yeah.
So another thing that I disliked about episode 1, I'm on team dislike apparently, was when he was trying to revive IG-11 and they're like, oh, his memory's broken. Well, they're like, his memory is broken, and they don't. So are you talking like his memories? In which case, like, he's not the same droid anymore. It's like he had a traumatic brain injury. He's a completely different person.
Right.
But then if it is oh, his RAM is broken and it's really hard to find that type of RAM, I can understand that. But the way that they use memory, I was just like, oh yeah, they got to be talking about his memories that are stored on the hard drive. And so like he is now a different droid, and that's kind of terrible. But he wants to bring him back anyway.
Which would basically be taking a machine that's capable of learning and then resetting its learning.
Right. At least back to a certain point, because they seem to remember.
I mean, it's kind of an assumption that droids are operating on what we call artificial intelligence, basically.
Yeah.
Like they can have memories. They can recall things that happened and like use that to reassess a situation in real time.
Yeah. Well, but then that kind of stinks.
Droids are fucking robots with AI, bro.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe he just doesn't understand it because droids aren't his thing, and he doesn't understand like, oh, if the memory is damaged, like that's just gone. It's not like, oh, we can like place it back together and make him remember that we're friends. I think it was like a fruitless endeavor that he was going on just because he was like attached to this one droid, but it didn't make sense because he doesn't like droids, and it's like this one selfless act from a droid completely changed his mind about it, apparently. And I'm just like,
several. They showed the more important one where he saved him. Right? He sprayed him with back to spray or whatever in the end of season 1.
Yeah, and he showed him his face and everything.
He showed him his face. I'm not alive. Yeah. But I mean, that as a character, but yeah, to be like, oh, it's been a statue exposed to the elements, but like you can still pull it down and kind of put it back together. That made no fucking sense. Like none of that did. And that's exactly what I'm saying, right? Nice. Like that's kind of filler where you're like, I have this kind of like fantasy element, right? Like some kind of like the curse of something or other, or the great book of whatever, like that might get referred to in the tavern, right? But like isn't actually a thing.
Right.
But they're showing us a show and not playing a role-playing game, so they can take it wherever they need to when they're ready to take it there Whereas if you do that in a role playing game, like then your characters are
Railroading.
like, oh no, you referred to the forbidden book of the whatever. Like now I'm fucking thirsty for that shit, and like it will, like I'm not gonna think about anything else until I get my hands on this thing that you just said to provide like flair.
I go for bards. They must know about this thing.
You're just trying to add dimension to the universe you're building, the storytelling space that you're creating. That's what's really fascinating about role-playing games and just storytelling broadly. It's like being able to build like a living thing that's completely fictional that people interact with. Because like most cinema, most novels are all fictional within like a universe that largely applies or largely like rules we're comfortable with apply to, right? Like when you think of any novel, like, oh, that's conceivable in reality as I understand it. Like, and so to take something like Star Wars or something and have this whole fucking sandbox tell stories in, is fucking remarkable.
It's quite appealing, yeah. And I think the goal is always to get past what everyone already knows from the shows and the movies and everything. So you're not pigeonholed by it.
Right. So is speaking of not being pigeonholed, we just have a couple minutes left for this segment. What was your opinion of them reprising the actor Ahmed Best as the fucking Jedi?
I only heard about this after I'd watched it, and
you didn't know who he was either.
No, I didn't know who he was. Well, of course he did. He didn't have giant eye stalks and big ears. Like, how am I going to know who he is?
Yeah. I guess we're not super fans, Zach. We're not.
We're not.
Fans.
No.
I had no fucking clue. But I thought it was my takeaway before realizing that they were like trying to, not trying to, but like it to me, it seemed like a gesture of gratitude, right?
Yeah,
like this dude just like I guess apparently he also did some kind of Star Wars themed like children's game show for Disney in 2020.
I mean, I don't blame him for doing what he did. Like, he was told what to do. He did it. No one stopped him. It's not
but the Star Wars fan base is also fucking racist.
Oh, okay.
Like, that's why people are like, oh, you just want to call us racist because we hated your shitty sequel trilogy. It's like, do you remember the fucking prequel trilogy? Which you're all talking pretty decent about now, and how much you fucking hate. Don't get me wrong. He's not likable. Like, my fucking girlfriend.
I don't know him outside of the role.
I don't either. But I'm just talking about the character, not even the individual. Like, you can hate the character. Like, that's perfectly reasonable. Like, to me, like, Andor is, like I said earlier, it's the pinnacle of fucking Star Wars. It's what Star Wars should be, in my opinion. So a character like Jar Jar Binks in The Phantom Menace, like, is just kind of obnoxious, right? Like,
yeah.
But you still shouldn't, like, somebody was doing motion capture. That technology at the time of The Phantom Menace was, like, not well refined.
No, you were wearing big suits with lots of balls on you.
I've seen pictures where he's literally wearing, like, a latex suit.
Ew.
It doesn't just cover his face.
Ooh. Fuck that.
But anyway, what did you think about that sequence? Because, like, some could say it's filler. It's not really necessary. But at the same time, it really kind of, again, it's part of that world building, right? Like, oh shit, here you are in this like event that is so familiar to all of us. And everybody was wondering how the fuck he got away, right? There was all this like, oh, R2D2 saved him. And it's like, oh, no, like fucking so-and-so saved him. Or, oh, it's this Jedi from some video game that's in the temple at that time. And he saves Grogu.
Are people debating this online?
What?
Said, is this from like online debates about it?
Yeah, bro.
Oh. No, okay, not a super fan at all. Maybe not even a regular fan.
No, I know that much. That people were fucking speculating like who saved Grogu.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't read much about Star Wars.
Okay, well, whatever, man. The point being is that I thought it was really cool that I didn't know who the actor was at the time. I just thought it was appropriate that the show didn't try and do like some other tie-in. They're just like, we can just fucking make whoever we want.
Yeah.
Here's this new Jedi Master you never heard of. And now there's like all this room to fucking write story.
Yeah.
Right? Like I saw one kind of Easter egg thing that was talking about how like on his fucking robe, he had like embroidery on like his inner tunic. And then we're saying like, here's other characters that have that, but it's not like everybody doesn't have it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they were trying to, but that's what I mean about world building, right? Like, and about like this kind of sandbox, right? Is you could do such a small detail as like, oh, let's just do some embroidery here. That would look cool, right? Like that's what the costume people, and then the fans are like, oh shit, okay, cool. There's like symbols that match here, and you might have some kind of tie-in expert that's like advising or whatever. That's like, oh, here are some symbols that were used on other costumes in other movies and shows. You can reuse some of those, but the way that like then it becomes kind of part of the mythology, and it's really just it's interesting to see it co-created, right? Like, and that is what Star Wars is. Like anybody that says, oh, that's not what Star Wars is, Last Jedi, that's not who Luke is, and okay, fucking whatever, it doesn't matter, man, because it's a co-created universe.
Right.
Like I'm sure you've heard fucking Samuel L. Jackson talk about wanting to be in Star Wars and talking to George Lucas, and then he didn't realize he was going to be a Jedi until he got there. He said, yeah. They're like, do you want to be in Star Wars? He said yes. And then he got to the studio during pre-production, and they're like, basically like, you're going to play a Jedi. He's like, what? I'm going to play a Jedi? They're like, yeah, here's your fucking, you can choose a lightsaber hilt out of the fucking prop box.
Yeah.
And he's like, I want that. And then they're like, okay, well, do you want to be blue or green? He's like, I want to be purple. And the reason was because he wanted his fucking kids or grandkids or whatever it was to be able to like pick him out in the big animated battle scene. Right? Like he wanted to stand out. He's like, can I have purple? And then it was this kind of discussion of like, oh, we've never really done purple. But
dude, now there's this whole thing where like, oh, the purple saber is this crystal and it requires a delve into the dark side every time you use it. You have to balance the light side and the dark side.
But that's what I'm saying.
Isn't he cool? yeah.
It's literally as random as like, I don't know. I thought fucking purple would be cool, and like my kids would be able to like be like, I'm the one with the purple, and they could be like, oh, that's so cool.
When did lightsaber forms have become like a big thing?
That was in the novels in the role playing game.
Oh, yeah, KOTOR.
Dude,
that's when I remember it first.
The D6, the West End games.
Yeah.
Is regularly cited as like a fundamental contributor to the Star Wars lore, which is really fucking cool.
Yeah,
because that's really where I got my introduction. Like I read the Han Solo trilogy. I read some other kind of like short story books like Tales of the Bounty Hunter. I read, of course, the fucking Thrawn trilogy. But other than that, like I didn't really read a lot. Like I probably read like maybe 8 or 10 Star Wars novels, and there's fucking dozens. There's so many.
Hundreds. There was a series
comics, like, and I haven't read any of the graphic novels or comics, like, and so there's this huge universe where stories are being told, and I have barely scratched the surface, even though like in terms of like the layperson, like both of us are fucking crazy nerds, and we're like,
oh yeah,
I've barely scratched the surface.
Yeah, it's degree. No, and it really is a degree. As I was saying prior to the show, that like back in high school, I needed a reference for all the aliens and their stats, and one did not exist, so I coded one, and like so I knew all their names and all their abilities for a short period of time. And then I didn't play for a while. And that's the sort of knowledge you got to exercise, remember.
Well, what if we had a game room?
You got to have trivia.
At our pagan church.
Hey, why not? What was the species that had one eye and could regenerate? Oh, gosh.
I am filling my pints.
That is the best way to drink. Economical. Yeah.
I was in Reading for I took a class actually. There's an organization, of course, in Reading that does like firearm instruction.
Mhm.
And I went and took a class this last weekend. It was cool.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, I'm
shot a gun forever.
What's that?
So I haven't shot a gun in forever. Like I think it was like middle of Navy service, so it's like 20 years now. I need to go shoot a gun.
Yeah, we should. And we should talk about it more maybe in the future. I'm going to step away for just a second. So maybe give everybody your final thoughts on the Mandalorian because we're a little over time, and then we'll get to Canadian Prepper.
Will do. Let's see. Episode 2. Mythosaur's existence. TIE squads. Oh, wait, that's 3. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was the one where they were trying to get the memory chip, but she basically says it's impossible because we more or less can't get it on this planet or this sector. And so they end up giving him the droid. And I'm thankful he wasn't cute because, like, Disney does have that tendency to stick cute everywhere and try to sell it. It's like, you already got Grogu. I'm sure he's made you like $500 million. Please don't make any more in this series. But yeah. Yeah, the whole thing with needing a droid for it was so weird, though, because like as soon as they figure out that the planet's okay to go on, he says, "I'm going to seal my helmet and go investigate, why the droid disappeared." So he wasn't even sure, and he just sealed up and went and did what the droid was doing anyway. And it was like that really, really made it feel like that entire scene with trying to get IG-11 and then settling for this droid was just, as Steve was saying, complete and utter filler. So that makes most of episode 1 filler. Not great. Yeah, it's pretty bad. I was just talking about the droid thing and how it ended up not mattering because he sealed his helmet and went out anyways.
Yeah, and I think again I'm gonna like plug Andor because I'm preparing myself. Like I just like the other day. This is a quick aside. The other day I was like fucking bored and I was like I should watch something. And I was like, what have I not watched in a while? Okay, I'll try the Book of Boba Fett. And I watched like half the first episode, and then it switched from like his flashback to present day, and I was like, oh, that's right. This fucking show's kind of shitty. And I'm like, I should probably just watch Andor again because that shit engages me every time I've seen it, which I've seen it 3 times now.
So I'm gonna need to step aside also, but there was
I'm gonna aside your aside.
Yeah, there's no there are, I mean, aside. There was a show I was watching on YouTube, and it was a guy who deep fakes as Obi-Wan and sometimes Anakin and sometimes or Qui-Gon Jinn. And they get to the end of of watching an episode of Boba Fett, and they're like, it really is weird that there's so much Boba Fett in this season of The Mandalorian. And that kind of like summed up my feelings about Boba Fett perfectly.
Well, yes, and also that's kind of what I felt about the Dr. Pershing episode of The Mandalorian. I was like, you know what? People, if anybody complains, oh, this isn't about the main character, I'm like, you were the same motherfuckers that were super stoked. You're like, oh, Luke Skywalker. Oh, because we're fucking fanboys that are so upset that they rewrote a character to not be fucking. Like at that point in both the Legends and I think in canon, like Luke Skywalker was so overpowered that like it would be a fucking Marvel movie. He'd be
You're
pulling
talking
fucking
about
starships out of the sky and shit. Like
like by the time he was fighting those droids. And when he first rescued Grogu.
If sequel trilogy was like really like well-played character, he'd be so goddamn overpowered.
Yeah. I mean, even if he went into isolation, like he kind of revealed he didn't actually go into full isolation. That he could just, of course, lift up the ship and leave. But like,
yeah, or just force projection himself.
Yeah. Of course. Well, yeah, but then he dies. He can do it once.
Yeah, I'm sure that he was just old and weak and had accomplished his purpose. That's
That's the
I
main thing.
feel
He
like
was
we
no longer
accomplished his
relevant to the plot.
purpose. Sorry, what?
I said he was no longer relevant to the plot, is what you're saying in writing terms.
No. I mean actually in storytelling terms.
Mm.
Kind of like when Yoda was old as shit for fucking ever, and then when Luke learned that lesson, Yoda's like, I can go now, basically. Like that's not how it went down, but that's how it played in my head.
Yeah, but like nobody learned a lesson except for Kylo Ren, and it definitely took him forever to accept it. Anyway,
but certain characters. I'm not gonna fucking spend a lot of energy defending them. Kind of like Q-Man and Shaman.
If you are, as I was saying, if you are talking about, oh my god, if you are talking about the legends, like 30 plus years later, yeah, he was fucking like Palpatine, level competent in the Force at that point. And so like even if he had retired, a little early, he still would have been like crazy, like Yoda, Yoda, Obi-Wan. I think all the crazy people that like integrate the Force into their fighting style really well, and that's what you're looking at. So it's like he definitely should have been better than he was in the movies, but he was an old man and couldn't do jumps.
Yes, probably true. Yeah. Anyway, so we talk about fictional worlds because they're really interesting. And honestly, I do think it contributes in a meaningful way to how I think about the future in the real world. Is because, like, if you accept this kind of like sandbox hypothesis, that like we can take stories and we can change those stories and we can add to those stories and we can contribute to writing a story that fits like our value system, then ultimately we can overcome like the most disturbing facts of our future. Like we can find a way to cope with this disintegration of an industrial capitalist society. That's why I like Star Wars. Well, no, that's not why. I mean, that's part of it. Like that's storytelling, right? So another thing we can do is tell stories through bulleted lists about I'm trying so hard to connect these two. It made sense when I started like
I'm sure it did. Like stars in the sky, so are the points. Like stars in the sky, so are the bulletin points in a listicle of 8 things.
They're all in alignment.
They're all in perfect
One of them is a quarter inch further to the right. Why is that? Oh shit, I fucked up the formatting.
Oh no, it won't get bigger. Wait, no, there we go. Oh, too big.
So this is Canadian Prepper, dude. I don't watch all of his stuff. Some of his stuff is so.
Here are 8 things.
Yeah.
I did mention in a different prepper space earlier, I left a comment when someone was like, oh, you don't fucking freak me out all the time or don't like use the scare factor a lot like Canadian Prepper. And I was like, right, but like the thing about Canadian Prepper is that like it's so over the top sometimes that like you can kind of get to like a relationship with the content where you don't take it seriously. Or you don't take it too seriously.
I mean, that's also what followers of Donald Trump did. He'd say bizarre, outlandish things, and they're like, yeah, but he doesn't mean exactly what he says.
Yeah, but he didn't mean what he said.
Well, yeah, but I mean, sounds
like, why do we have nukes if we can't use them? And everybody's like, oh my God, he's going to use nukes. And everybody's like, he doesn't really mean it. Did he fire nukes? Joe fucking Biden is a lot closer to firing fucking nukes than fucking Trump was. I just want to tell you that. It's okay. We unite over our fucking beliefs in earth spirituality and other kinds of things that will create the core of our belief system. And we do not necessarily agree on
for the purposes of
electoral politics.
For the purposes of this hypothetical church, I have no beliefs, and that's allowed per the things I read it.
Yeah, we should definitely though. We gotta no, seriously. And we just like create like a really simple liturgy and start getting together like we get together like once for one high holy day. Right?
Hey man,
Like, oh,
someone's
we
got to
went
replace.
camping and we held this ritual. Okay, we're a religious community. Like at that point. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, might as well get a tax break for it.
Might as well use it to prevent our hard-earned dollars from being funneled into a machine that murders, which is part of our church's value system, is we do not believe in murdering. So we could also make a lot of money, like basically like selling it, and that's a joke, right? Like partly, I do think that like conscription resistance could absolutely be part, like we have to have a discussion and see where it fits within our value system, right? Like, but like I could see conscription resistance being incorporated into what we do, um and not necessarily based on purely pacifist lines, right? Like, but you could also be like, well, if you pay for a membership, then your kids don't have to get drafted to fight China. Like I'm just thinking about, hey man, economics is a fucking thing. Like every organization has a fucking economic footprint. You know what I mean?
For a small tithe of $9.95.
For a small tithe of annual tithe of $799 or whatever. Like $800 for a family.
Oh my god, I want to play this video.
Oh yeah,
that are bound to happen
point
after
point.
the apocalypse.
So should we watch
No more borders
and then go point by point?
How
much time do we got? We got 30 minutes.
Sure. Ready?
Whole thing
to be
then
enforced just one giant post-apocalyptic shithole country called Earth. No more lawyers. Sorry, Mike. When there's no more rule of law, there are only executioners. The unlucky ones that survive the initial blast will likely perish due to waterborne pathogens from drinking dirty water. Millions more will die from infections that would normally be prevented by a $10 pharmaceutical purchase. Speaking of big pharma, millions of people are going to lose their minds, but at least they'll be in the right place. The discontinuation of pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere will diminish what scientists call the aerosol masking effect, which ironically will cause a rapid warming of the planet. New cult startups will likely blame you for how much things suck and probably sacrifice you. You'll have no idea what the weather is going to be tonight, tomorrow, or ever again.
Here are 8 things that are bound.
Okay. So, taken as a whole, love it.
Taken as a whole, very well edited list.
Yeah.
Really brought home some things that like people think about but don't spend a lot of time thinking about. And then also like it's funny because like his audience is generally, I mean, the prepper community, even though it's, I think I've mentioned in this space before, is far less, I find it as someone who kind of like dabbles from time to time in the prepper spaces. I find that it's become much less jingoistic in its approach, and it seems to be much more broad reaching. I think COVID had a lot to do with that because people realized how fucking vulnerable systems were. And so it ceased to be like a realm of just kind of like right wing. I don't want to say nut jobs because that would be disrespectful, but like generally people from like less populated areas that kind of like were very distrustful of other people, etc. And it shifted from that to being kind of like fairly mainstream. It's almost like prepping is almost a meme at this point. If you type in prepping, like you can get all sorts of prepping content, and like just like circa 9/11, that shit was like almost the exclusive purview of like what's his name that tried to blow up the Oklahoma City building and shit. Like
McVeigh.
Yeah, McVeigh. Yeah, it was kind of the purview, or the people who overtook the wildlife refuge and held it hostage for a while, the fucking Bundys.
Yeah.
Right? Like it would be those kinds of people that you figured were preppers, and now it's just like, Tim and Sharon in like the fucking suburbs of Cincinnati are like, oh man, this fucking I couldn't get
place
this
over
thing
here.
I needed at fucking at Lowe's the last time I went, right? Like, and then they're like, shit, what does that mean for us, right? Like, whatever.
Okay, so no, I'm going to say some of that is not unfair. Like, so many things just disappeared either at the beginning or through the transition of the pandemic. Like, we can't get ground pork for breakfast at Winco anymore. It just disappeared. And thinking maybe, hey, they're just out, I went and asked, and they're like, oh no, we're pretty much not going to carry that anymore. Like, the closest thing we have is this Jimmy Dean product. And I'm like, what the fuck? So now it means I got to go get ground pork, like from somewhere that's $1 or $2 more expensive per pound. Like, that's just one of the like weird effects that I've seen. Like, the strangest things just disappearing and never coming back. Like Denison's chili. We went to 3 different stores and didn't see it. And so I had to look it up online, and I'm like, is Denison's chili just gone? And they're like, no, they're just experiencing, supply chain issues. And so in order to maximize profits, they're only shipping close to their production line for now. It's like, fuck, man, I'm never going to get that good ass chili again.
Yeah, but that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And that's what kind of collapse looks like, right? Is you had like
slow at first.
Say a factory in Iowa that was taking seconds off the beef market, right? Like the kind of lower quality cuts. Yep. But it doesn't matter because you're just pressure cooking that shit in a steel can, right? Like with some other things. Like, so it doesn't really matter so much. Like, it's still calories, it's still food. It's not the greatest food for you, obviously. It's not whole food per se. It's industrial food, but it'll still fucking feed you. Mm-hmm. When shit hits the fan, having fucking canned chili is a good thing. But that's what the collapse looks like. It's like, okay, we have a factory here, and the company is like, shit, it's a lot harder. We can't make as many units. Like, where can we make the most? Like, where can we like cut costs? And if transportation is a huge cost, and you're like, okay, we know our market in the tri-state area or whatever, right? Like, we know our regional market can absorb this many units. Then we're going to cut the extra units that we can't produce anyway and just bring our market closer to home. Mm-hmm. And so like it like fits within this kind of thing that I've been thinking, like everybody that's complaining about the globalists, right? Like, you're like, oh, one world digital currency. Like, anybody that still believes in that
currency,
that like society is going to get more complex is deeply misinformed. Because like the reality is that what we see with like things like BRICS, right? Like, you even see economic concentration among like political agreements, like contracting. It's no longer this highly centralized monoculture, right? It's not a unipolar order. That the world is breaking down into economic arrangements that might be beneficial at other scales, right? And so there's this trajectory to turn from like human scale towards this like edging closer to like the singularity scale, where like it just like everything merges and becomes like, that kind of concept of just like the universal orgasm or whatever, like everything comes together, the singularity.
I don't think you know what the singularity is.
I don't know what the singularity is.
Doesn't sound like it to me.
I probably don't.
That's just where man and machine
pictured it was just this like merging of like consciousness and technology.
I mean, yeah, but that's just where pretty much a machine and man are indistinguishable because we've integrated it all into us, and then we can form for people that are really into it. They're like, oh yeah, we would almost invariably form a hive consciousness due to our desire to like share thoughts at an ever increasing rate.
Right. So kind of what I said is where everything becomes unified and commingled, where there's no distinction anymore.
Okay. Now it makes more sense.
Yeah. That's how I pictured it in my mind.
Yeah.
The singularity, just the word itself, evokes an image of like all converging into one. And what I'm saying is that we're actually in the process of disintegration. When you see things like BRICS, right? Like when you see Europe starting to question American hegemony, right? Like when you start to see agreements and arrangements and positions of power shifting fundamentally, right? Like I don't think that there's more globalization and more homogenization on our horizon. I think that like now is the time as we crest that curve, right, on the limits to growth, that like human beings that have different ways of thinking about the world based on their history and the root of those belief systems, etc., right? Like we all have basic agreement on many things, but there's a kind of like cultural lens that we apply to how we interpret the world. And instead of bringing that to where there is one cultural view of the world, we're actually starting to back away from that already. I think at least culturally, we're on the downward slide for sure of cultural consciousness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, and it does make you wonder, like, is it just any natural effect of the energy, bonanza being over?
No, 100%. That's what it has to deal with, and all the other effects, the ripples, so to speak, through this system, right?
Yeah.
And it to me, it's fascinating. So we're kind of at this historical moment. Canadian Prepper laid out 8 things that I think are often not like at the forefront of people's thinking, and that provide a really great gateway to a discussion about what does it look like? What does it look like as the system unravels? Like people who've lived through COVID, especially adults like our age, where like we're much more aware of how things work because we're much more aware of how our own home economies operate, right? Like, where you might not be quite so aware when you're in your early 20s, for example. And just because we're getting older and we're like, oh shit, what do I do about my future? I don't know. You want to start a fucking pagan church that's like a fucking tax shelter, trying to just fucking absorb as many boomer dollars as we can. All those well-meaning boomers that just want a place to park their fucking money tax free.
Oh man, we're gonna have to edit out that part.
Fuck it, bro.
Anywho,
that makes us shrewd businessmen.
You want to go through the
how can a communist be a fucking capitalist? I don't know.
Cheap.
Talk about starting a church with them. No, really realistically, like I'm not a capitalist, right? Because like the objective with the church is not to like create an empire and like eventually control all the resources from this place to this place. Although in reality, like in my mind, I'm thinking, how could we materially utilize and hold that space? Like, are these highways defensible if we wanted to like carve out our own fucking autonomous zone by like enforcing a border with violence? Like, I don't know. It's a conversation we should have because I clearly think about it more than I probably should. But let's go point by point through Canadian Prepper unless you were going to say something.
No, I was going to recommend that.
After the apocalypse.
No more borders to be enforced, just one giant post-apocalyptic country called Earth.
Yeah, disagree. It's going to be very much... I disagree. It's going to be a lot smaller people establishing a lot smaller borders.
You're right. I literally was just basically saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Do you have additional thoughts?
No, but I mean, like, it's just silly that would even make it into the list. Like, if this guy's to be taken seriously and he says no more borders, it's like, no, comma, more borders. Like, that's how the sentence needs to go.
Yes, I agree with you, but it depends on the scale of the disaster, right? Like, if it's a slow-moving disaster, like what we're experiencing now with, like, the fucking floods, which we'll update the next time we get together, Because a bunch of fucking reservoirs had to dump water and shit, like. And then I'm thinking like this is the arc storm, but like this is also the arc storm with all of that infrastructure in place, right? Like, because if you calculated the total acre feet of water that we can impound with our dams and flood control reservoirs and hydroelectric reservoirs, if all of that water was down in the valley right now, or the vast majority of that was down in the valley, it would be arc storm shit. Like we're just talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acre feet. Tens of thousands, millions potentially. I don't actually know. We'll see. Maybe that would be a good study, right? Like, I don't know. Either way, we're getting a lot of rain. And other than that, I forgot what I was saying. Oh, about no more borders.
Yeah.
I agree with you, and I had kind of just alluded to the fact of like, could we hold this territory? Is like a thought that runs through my mind. So clearly, in the broader sense, like that technically is a border. When you're like, we enforce sovereignty over this space, but it's not the same as borders. And I think that it depends on the scale of the disaster. Like a slow moving disaster like climate change, I think you could hold borders. Like if like 50 to 100 fucking 100 kiloton nukes dropped on the fucking US, like that imaginary, remember what's that line from fucking Blow? When he's like, all I did was take a plant across an imaginary line, right? Like she's like, unfortunately, that line was real, and the plant you were carrying is illegal. Right? Do you remember that from Blow?
No.
Oh no? You've seen Blow though, right?
Maybe. Who's in it?
Johnny Depp. I always wanted to say Ray Liotta, but like he played the same character in fucking Goodfellas.
Oh, I do remember that one. Yeah.
So and so the in Blow, like that's kind of what he says early on, right? Before he gets into trafficking cocaine, he's just moving weed.
Yeah.
And then when he finally gets busted, he's like, and it shows him briefly in court, and he's like, all I did, he was representing himself. He's like, all I did was take a plant to cross an imaginary line. And the judge looks at him. It's like, that line was real and that plant was illegal.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and so in that sense of borders, right, what I'm saying is that sense of borders will go away.
National
and borders will become again frontiers. Where it's not a hard line, but it is somewhat of a line where you see a blending to varying degrees on either side of that line. It'll become an ecotone or an edge, right, between cultures and political systems. But you're right, in terms of like, when he says no more borders, he's saying there is no hard line where we can enforce movement of people. And in that sense, under state collapse, since the state is the organization that enforces that, and even then they're not very good at it, right? Nor am I someone who thinks they should be good at it, right? Like I am much more a porous borders person than a fucking hardline immigration person, like,
Yeah, I mean, I would like to be welcomed to other countries.
Precisely. And again, a couple weeks back we talked briefly about ethnogenesis, this concept that like people move, and sometimes like large groups of people move, and they interbreed with the people that are already there, and you have like this syncrecy or syncretic culture that emerges. And so that you actually, by humans, my hypothesis is by humans moving we're actually better positioned to survive because we have a diversity of fucking adaptive strategies to survival, right? Versus being just like, this is the way we do it, and then things don't go that way, and you're like, I don't know what to do. This is the way we do it. Versus like, this is the way we do it. Oh, well, we do it this way. Oh, that actually kind of works better, right? Like, at any rate, no more borders. I think it depends on the scale of the crisis. I think I agree with you that borders will be different. But as far as a state enforcing a national border, there will be none. Borders will be determined by what territory communities decide to defend.
Right. And they will probably like rejoin over time.
100% defend. I was literally on Amazon today looking up books that might help me better understand squad tactics and defense. So it's because I am me. Part of my advanced diploma in permaculture design, regenerative land management, will be not just disaster preparedness and response and a risk assessment for my community dependent on what all the literature says, and also what I have assessed as our risks to the community. But we'll also include all sorts of elements, including how to make my like where would I define my neighborhood if defense was my priority. But like, I know my neighbors, but the 3 lots we have aren't defensible. Like, how far out do I have to go in my neighborhood to make my neighborhood defensible? I sometimes say that we'll just be like taking a walk to the park down the sidewalk, which is next to a busy boulevard, so it's not as idyllic as I may have just made it sound. Oh, you're leaving. Okay, that's fine. I'll keep monologuing and then we'll move on. Yeah, it's not as idyllic as I made it sound, but like I'll just be like walking to the park near my house, which is to the east of me, and be like, that bedroom window up there in that house has a pretty decent view of like a wide swath of street. Like, that'd be a good place to fucking stack a bunch of sandbags and have a fucking, have a shooting position from. It's not completely unreasonable to think of, like, when you walk through, I don't know who lives there. I don't know if they'd be amenable to that plan. I'm not saying like enforce that plan upon them. Would it be weird to like drop a flyer on their front door or like a little note on their front door that says, hey, I was just thinking, like, your bedroom window there like overlooks the street. It would be a great shooting position. Have you thought about putting sandbags up there for defense so that bullets can't go through the wall? And have you thought about, do you have the capacity to defend that position should the neighborhood call on you to defend that position? And the reality is that like that person under most circumstances would probably call the police and be like, this fucking psycho was just talking about defending the neighborhood. But reality is that we have to figure out how to make those conversations happen, right? Like, it's just crazy. So borders, we can enforce a neighborhood border. I just talked of an example. Talk about how I would most likely be viewed as a fucking lunatic if I knocked on the front door of a house that I walked by and I said, that second story bedroom window looks like it has really great field of view on the fucking street below.
Yes, you might get looked at.
Should I put a note on the door that says, hey, you should probably at least layer the interior of that wall with sandbags and make that a shooting position because it's a great shooting position, and how I would most likely be viewed as a lunatic, but also knowing that because there are no borders, not because, but just because national borders don't break down, don't mean that like, and not saying borders are a great thing, but the reality is that like, you have a limited amount of, you're like, okay, cool. Between all of us that have agreed to this, we have 2,000 pounds of rice, right? A lot of rice. But then you have to think like, before you start like fucking just giving everybody rice, you have to be like, well, are we going to plant? Is the region going to plant rice next year? How much rice can we conceivably grow without pesticides and herbicides? Right? Like, how does the system work, and how does production look without a lot of the common inputs? Like, what can it produce without those inputs? Right? Those questions are rarely asked. And in the agricultural literature, those questions aren't asked. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so we never really have like a hard look at like, what does it look like if just all of a sudden you can still plant, you have enough seed to plant, but you don't have enough fucking fertilizer and you don't have enough pesticides. Like, what does your crop look like? Right? Like, oh, I don't know. It could turn out great, or because we're not applying these poisons we've been applying, like most of the crop gets eaten. Right. You're like, fuck. So like when you go into it, you have to be like, we have enough rice to supply everybody in the group we've decided to defend our neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
We have enough rice to last us 15 months. What do we do? Because that gives us one season, realistically, right?
You claim the nearby schools and use the football fields as area to grow food.
100%. That was actually in one of my visioning exercises. Was all the athletic fields would be turned into olive groves. That's what I said.
Mm-hmm. Oh, olive groves. Okay, yeah.
Because olives are they grow well here with minimal irrigation, like in our climate with minimal irrigation. They provide really good calories and really good fat.
Yeah.
I mean, they're olives are a good fucking crop to grow, bro.
They are, along with a few other things that work well in this area. Shall we look at number 2?
Canadian pepper point 2.
Disagree.
Motherfucker. You disagree?
I disagree.
Holy shit! I don't have enough.
It all depends. It all depends. Like what is the scale of the apocalypse? Are you talking like all his stuff is like nuclear apocalypse? Okay, cool. Nuclear apocalypse. Is that what our frame of reference is? Because if you're talking about that, yeah, like you won't for a while, but things will recover.
On the short term. The short term,
sure. On the short term, yeah. Okay, all these points are true, but they're also very short-sighted. And I guess that's the thing is, let's not think like corporations one quarter at a time. Let's think long term. Like, yeah, lawyers are gone for now, but like they'll come back.
I guess as far as both of these first points, borders and lawyers, right? Like, I think that's the kind of point he has, this not a linear, but like this kind of like clear progression. Says no borders, no lawyers, right? Because like borders are part of the rule of law, and then he like continues down professions, as we'll see. But like one of the clips I could not find, or actually I did throw in there, but we don't have to watch it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you like consume information about the Bronze Age collapse, like the Sea People's Bronze Age collapse, like the Great Bronze Age collapse, because there was a bunch of civilizations centered around the Mediterranean that all collapsed simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And if you watch documentaries on that, like you'll come across some that are like that talk about like the different professions and how like at that time not everybody was educated, so like in the classes of society there was like the fucking aristocracy, and then there was like a warrior caste, and there was like an administrative caste, right? Like people who were accountants and other kind of managers of the state. And then you had like a priestly class, right? Like, and all these other people. But basically, it was like my understanding, how I conceptualize like collapse and like the kind of broader scale, broader time horizon is that like how do I say? Yeah, I can't think of an effective way to say it. You're supposed to help me out, bro. You're supposed to start talking.
Step 3. I can't rewind it, but it said
when you have nothing to say to just move on instead of let the conversation organically emerge.
I couldn't help you, man. Let's see.
Now it's waterborne illnesses. True.
That's fine. I accept that. Yeah, because our current system of fresh water is very, very vulnerable. I have
the last
no
one
rebuttal
was
for that one.
lawyers.
Oh yeah.
Yes, Bronze Age civilizational collapse. The people who fared the worst were the fucking accountants, and were the people who fucking drafted legislation.
Well, yeah.
Like, there's a warlord, there's a warrior caste, there's a priestly case, which has its function. But in a highly bureaucratized state, there's all of these administration functions, and it's the administrators of the bureaucracy that are the biggest fucking losers when shit hits the fan.
Again, yeah, right off the bat. Yeah, I mean, right off the bat. But then, of course, it comes back because you'll have to establish rules and laws and come up with fair punishments for them so that you don't have one person who's in charge handing out one punishment, another person handing out a completely different one. Like,
yeah, but right now, like on one court case, and then granted they're managing other court cases simultaneously. I'm not saying like it is the entire focus of these individuals, but like one court case that I probably shouldn't have spent so much time reading, but I wound up spending a lot of time reading. That one court case was probably like several dozen people involved, both in litigating and just typing it up.
Oh yeah, and that's complete bullshit. There shouldn't be that many. Like, the idea of a court stenographer is really silly in an era where you can have everyone mic'd up easily. And like, they should, instead of having one of them, you should just have someone like who's behind a soundboard, making sure everything's being recorded at appropriate volumes. You need a DJ, not a stenographer, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think that ultimately, like, lawyers will be some of the first to go too, right? Because like, if you don't have like a functioning government that can like extract taxes, like, how do they pay the people that operate the legal system? Not just the lawyers, but the judges and the court clerks and so on and so on, to where like there really isn't necessarily a rule of law, and it will be much more limited. And I think that law generally throughout most history prior to fossil fuels, or really prior to like, I mean, prior to Western civilization for sure, were largely just like adjudicated bodies, right? Like, it'd be like a council of elder mothers that like heard some kind of dispute and then like discussed it and made a decision. And then everybody, the system was validated by people's participation in it. And they're like, but generally speaking, at that time, if you were like, no, I don't like what the elder mothers say about my fucking character flaw, then you could, like, under industrial capitalism, you could walk away and remake yourself. You know, you could leave Schenectady, New York. I'm just kidding, because you had made fun of me for saying Schenectady before.
So anyway,
you could leave like upstate New York and just wind up in like, you know, the middle of some like minor valley in fucking Idaho, and just like no one would know who you are. You'd have to have the dentist or whatever his fucking name was from Django Unchained. He would have to track your ass down and like know a bunch about you, even though you're like, everybody's like, why'd you shoot the sheriff? And it's like, because Because I'm a bounty hunter, and that dude was a piece of shit. And everybody's like, oh, he was a piece of shit. I had no idea. It's like, you're goddamn right you had no idea because you're fucking some bumpkin from the middle of fucking nowhere.
Anyway, I guess my point is that humans bounce back fast. Like, once we have ideas in our heads, we don't like to let them die. And like, you're gonna have need for someone to adjudicate problems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You might not call them a lawyer, but they are enforcing the law. It's the same thing, and it'll come back faster every time. Like, we already know that laws and lawyers and stuff exist, so it's not like it has to be created whole cloth. You just copy and paste what you know into a new set of rules for your little area, and there you go. Bob's your uncle. Like, lawyers. It took almost no time. Yeah, I mean, it took almost
fair enough, man.
Yeah. Fair
die. Enough. Let it roll.
The last one was bad water, and totally agree with that one.
Oh, bad water. Yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah, sewage
Sanitation's
is hard to do.
Yeah, we're fucked.
Yep. Many will die from treatable infections. Agreed completely. I don't think that's contestable. We wouldn't be able to create any of the antibiotics that we have, antivirals, et cetera,
without industrial civilization.
And I like this one. People will go insane. Yeah, like we already have a whole bunch of people on the streets who are untreated. And now imagine if you take all the people that are in their houses and untreated and see what happens.
2 other points to that.
Yeah.
Also related to lack of access to like antibiotic pharmaceuticals, like psychotropic pharmaceuticals.
Right? Yeah.
Is part of it, right? People will go insane because they don't have access to pharmaceuticals, which is why I said I really appreciated his narrative jumps. Like they really fairly clear.
Those are well done. YouTube
short. Yeah. But yeah, people won't have access to pharmaceutical or pharmatropics or whatever they call them, basically psychotic meds, right? And I had a conversation with someone before. I was talking about collapse, and he's just like, no, that'll never happen, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, it doesn't really, like, the law of thermodynamics and the fucking biophysical realities of this planet don't give a shit what you think.
Right. Those factories are going to shut down pretty quick.
Happen or not. Like the planet does not give a fuck. The planet has a particular amount of fossil fuels available because there was a particular amount of photosynthetic life that was alive at some point that died and then under heat and pressure turned into fucking fossil fuels that we now tap into. Right? Like,
now assuming it's
of this planet does not give a shit that your partner is a fucking bipolar and you insist that you need lithium or whatever to like maintain their fucking bipolar. Like, this system does not give a fuck about you.
Yeah. And we'll hold on to the anti.
Oh, I have MS. You fucking hate. You're an ableist because you believe that, like, you believe in this myth of scarcity.
What?
Like, I understand ecology, my friend. Like, it doesn't matter if you think it's a myth of, like,
when did we move into a post-scarcity economy
that's leveraged to be fucking racist and ableist and homophobic or whatever, right? Like, but there are also biophysical realities that we cannot escape. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the most ardent futurists won't talk about, us being anywhere near a society that doesn't have needs. We're definitely not in a post-scarcity era right now. So to think that, your medicine will always be available if the factory gets nuked or something like that, and you better believe those are tempting targets.
In my kind of like bargaining with that kind of confrontation was like, oh, okay, where are they sourcing the mineral lithium that they're using in medication? Turns out a salt lake in the deserts in southeastern California. So like a few 100 miles away. And I was like, well, you're probably okay because they traded was it obsidian, right? They're really like glass, like sharp,
usually black or brown.
Yeah. Stone. It's
it's a
for
scalpels
stone that flakes. Yeah. I was like, I believe that they produced that in a place that participated in this pre-industrial exchange between human beings. You have really sharp fucking rock, right? That we can use for a variety of practical purposes. The arrow tips or whatever, right? And we're trading you for seashells and other things like that. There's nothing that says that the new system that emerges can't provision lithium from some fucking salt lake.
Yeah, but it'll probably get used by warlords for batteries so that they can power their little kingdoms.
Maybe.
I don't think they're going to care about the unwell.
You don't have control over that. But the fact of the matter remains is, I'm sorry you have multiple sclerosis or whatever the fuck it's called. MS. Sclerosis?
That's the one.
Which is like a degenerative bone disease, right?
Let's learn together.
Let us learn together, even though we're like 10 minutes over time. And we're like halfway through this list.
It damages nerve cells.
There you go. I had someone be like, I couldn't exist without industrial civilization. And I'm like,
then you won't exist.
I'm really sorry. It doesn't make me an ableist to just simply point out that, like, the data says, physics say, biology says, like the sciences say, even human cultural history. I read that, like, I don't know if it was early Greeks or like the Renaissance Greeks, like the second phase of Greek history that we commonly understand. But I was reading that, like, they did not, and the whole ritual of Christianization in the Christian church, right? Like when you name someone and have a ritual where they're given a name.
Yeah, a christening. Yeah.
Christening. Thank you. What did I say? Christianization?
No idea.
Christening.
Yeah.
The Christian ritual of christening is similar to what I read about ancient peoples who still practice paganism in Western civilization. That, like, basically they did not name children until they had, like, made it through, like, the first few fucking weeks of life.
Yeah, some places
because the first few weeks of life for a human child is for any fucking creature.
Yeah.
Like, now I have chicks, right? Like, because I'm like, I need more fucking egg laying hens because my flock is getting fucking old, among other things. Like, some of them are dying, just they're not very resilient, and like between wildfire smoke and heat waves and other things, they're like, you can just tell they're slowing down a lot faster than the others. And so you're like, okay, cool. At any rate, like, I'm sorry. We always do these fucking streams. I'm like high and I'm kind of buzzed.
If you're talking about your chickens.
I'm talking about chickens, but what was I saying about chickens?
You're talking about their eggs and how they're breaking down, and that's probably more entropy.
Their bodies are breaking down. Oh, I was getting chicks. Yeah. Right now, I just got to the point where, like, I'm not super paranoid, right? Like, so, like,
gotcha.
The first 3 weeks of their life or so, like, I'm checking on them 2 or 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Because they're so vulnerable to changes that if, like, the heat lamp burned out or something else happened, like they didn't have access to clean water, or, like, even though it was cold and rainy.
Is there any reason why you can't put them out with the hens you already have?
Yes, there is a reason why.
Okay.
Because the reason you incubate is so that you can have more control over survival rates. If I had put the 7 out there that I got, I might have 3 raised.
Okay.
to adulthood. And that's my point.
Yeah.
Is that like that first 3 weeks, I'm super paranoid. They're starting to get tail feathers. They're about 3 or 4 weeks old now.
Mhm.
And now I'm at the point where I'm like, I can give them kind of like less adequate housing in terms of like, I can give them like a larger space with less concentrated heat source and less active management, as long as I make sure they have food and water. I can start checking on them once a day.
Mhm.
Right?
You're hardening off your
Instead of
chicks.
3 times a day. And the reason is because most life, including human beings, pre-industrial times, most babies, not most, but a statistically significant amount of babies died before they like got to the 10th week
Mhm.
or whatever their development. For a chicken it's like a couple
What would be
weeks, but
classified
for
as,
a human might be like 5 months, right?
yeah, basically infant mortality.
Yeah, infant mortality. Perfect. Thank you, my friend. Let's watch the rest of this because we're way over time already. And I
We're
gotta
way
go.
over time. It's all right.
Big Pharma, millions of people are going to lose their minds, but at least they'll be in the right place.
Okay.
At least they'll be in the right place.
Yeah.
We talked about that pharmacological, but also like breakdown of industrial society. I know a lot of people that did not really handle COVID well. When I was
Me? Yeah, me too. And I was
I
fine.
was like, what?
Yeah.
I mean, I wish that like our society provided more for us, but I was like, this changes my life very little. And in fact, some of the ways it changes my life, I find better.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
It
some
was
people freaked out.
it was great. I really liked the clean air. That was a benefit of not having everyone allowed out, whenever they wanted to be out for whatever reason they wanted to be out. But yeah, a lot of the things poorly handled. Anyway,
You get fresh air when every even day.
yeah, exactly.
Kind of like gas rationing, right?
Yep.
Where you're like now control people's like participation in like public spaces and shit.
I definitely found that like it was a good excuse for a lot of places to stop offering things that they used to offer that they never really wanted to offer, but they felt like they had to offer. Like bars and restaurants are a good one because they were like, oh yeah, we have to do indoor seating and we can't just basically turn our already successful dine-in restaurant into a to-go restaurant. And then the pandemic came along and they got like the ability to basically do dine out, and suddenly people were like, well, since everywhere is dine out, I guess I'll go to Sizzler's dine out or whatever. And so like that was actually kind of an interesting moment. It was just like, but now you would hope they would go back and have indoor seating, but so many like especially fast food restaurants don't allow indoor seating. Just the weird little changes that happened. Way worse way worse when the apocalypse happens though.
Let's play these next few.
The discontinuation of pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere will diminish what scientists call the aerosol masking effect, which ironically will cause a rapid...
I say false. I say people are going to like get worse because they'll run out of fuels that we've been doing, gas, diesel, and natural gas. But then we'll just start burning trees and shit. So it'll be more or less the same.
Oh no, there's going to be a period. I definitely agree with the sense that there will be a period of deforestation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because if you look at the data, like the deforestation was a huge problem, and then it kind of shifted gears around like the early 90s when globalization happened, right? Like,
yeah.
And you'd see this shift to where like the pressure from deforestation seemed to ease, right? It was the mid 90s to early 2000s. Deforestation started to ease globally. For a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's environmental consciousness, but a lot of the reason I think was just like resource depletion, right? Like we deforested these areas and they ceased to be economically responsive, and so we kind of like gave them a break.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
Do you think that as fossil fuels get phased out or their availability becomes less reliable, people will absolutely turn towards biomass? Because if you look at a like energy consumption curve
Mm-hmm.
that includes biomass and then all the various fossil fuels.
Mm-hmm.
From 1800 to 2000, it's fucking an exponential curve. But the baseline of that curve is always biomass.
Mm-hmm.
Because in 1800, people burned fucking wood. You could trace that back, way the fuck back.
Right.
And you would see an uptick at the beginning of industrialization, right? Like in the mid 1700s, when we really started cutting forests down to make coal and other things. But you could see, I mean, if you broke that down to regionally, you would see regional collapses, right? You would see like, oh, the Middle East used to have like forests. They used to call them the cedars of Lebanon. They were so famous that like Egyptian kings were like, I want to see a boat in the harbor that's full of fucking cedar logs. Right?
Well, and that would have been amazing to him because that would have been cleared out of his area so long ago.
Right. And so what you have is like you have deforestation en masse like 2,000 years ago.
Right.
In the Middle East, which is why we conceive of it as a desert, right? Like it used to be fucking grasslands and fucking forest and parts of it, and then like oak savanna and other parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it just got deforested. Now it's a fucking desert. Now
Got
it's
to build
an
things
area
somehow.
that most people don't think much about, except like, why is our oil under their sand? Right?
Mm-hmm. Go Flowbots. Yeah.
So we're at our ends.
We're getting close. I do wonder if the extra burning of biomass though would help to mitigate the next one he talks about. Oh, sorry, he was talking. Damn it, he was talking about the aerosol effect. Yeah, and I think that these shit tons of burning that would inevitably ensue would probably help to put a whole bunch of our aerosol up in the atmosphere.
Yeah, aerosol masking is kind of funny, and I think when we were kind of like getting ready to launch tonight, I had mentioned like, oh, I'll save my thoughts. One of my thoughts was like that heat wave we had in Canada in 2021 or 2020, yeah, 2021. I was like, this is literally like a 6-month delay from the COVID shutdown. And like all that went through my mind was like, oh, we shut down the entire economy. And so for a brief, because the aerosol masking effect responds very quickly.
Yeah.
Like carbon stays in the atmosphere for a few hundred years and methane stays for like a decade or two, right? But like aerosol masking, if you just stop the aerosol, it's like the fucking response is almost immediate because it's falling out all the time. So if you're not adding it, like within a year or two, you have like no effect of that.
And they're very complicated molecules that get broken up very easily.
Yeah, they're volatilizing, right? Under solar radiation. It's just the way that chemicals work, right? Like the energy from solar radiation is breaking apart these chemicals, and once it's broken them all apart, like it's no longer absorbing them. That's what the aerosol masking is. It's like chemicals absorbing solar energy, right? To change.
So to make this worse, without this all going on, you already have people talking about geoengineering by doing high altitude aerosol sprays that'll stay a lot longer and be made of more durable UV resistant materials, and that way, you cool it down while continuing to maintain your current carbon levels. So
and then when you don't have the surplus fossil fuel energy to launch the mission to dump the aerosols in the atmosphere, it's the same with nuclear, right? And we might have touched on this a few weeks back when we talked about nuclear, but it's like we build a nuclear plant, but what's to say the political and social and economic institutions are in place that are required to ensure that nuclear plant has access to cooling water and has access to et cetera, so forth, right? Like,
You can build it and be like, we have all these safety procedures in place. It's like, do we have? Is there the access to credit? Right? Is our banking system solvent enough to provide the wages to the individual that's supposed to go fucking do the monitoring check in the event that like the banking system collapses? Like, do you know that you can pay that guy to show up and do his fucking job if you're saying everything will be fine because we have people that do their job, right? Like,
Yeah, and even planned shutdowns of nuclear plants you're still monitoring, so it's not like you can ever just stop monitoring, because even the newer plants that are designed today to have negative feedbacks in power failure situations, or like loss of coolant, they still need to be monitored by someone in order to ensure that like flow is going through the plant, because as it is, like, you can shut it off and have the normal heat gradients move the cooling around. Like, a lot of the plants in existence now feature something along those lines where they can be cooled automatically, but
yeah,
you still got to monitor it to make sure it's actually happening and that shit doesn't go crazy and that you need to expend some of your emergency energy. So, like, yeah, that's a good point. They're probably going to get abandoned real quick once no one's playing or paying their money.
that's right.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on his last couple?
Cults? I mean, yeah, like,
We're literally talking about starting a pagan church. Like,
yeah.
Could it be a cult? It depends. If we find the right charismatic front person, I'm okay with being in a cult, as long as I'm in the inner circle that exercises power. I didn't say that.
Yeah, it's on it's on tape. But of course there will be cults, because two humans can't be next to each other, without disagreeing and splitting right in two.
That's right. And we already have cults, right? Like, we
Yeah.
already have cults of personality.
We already have
People who are like,
Scientology.
oh, AOC is great and Joe Biden is great. And you already have like fucking the cult of science, like, you better get your vaccine or you're a Nazi, and like all these other things, right? Like, we already have cults. But what
Hey.
he's talking about is like, and I saw an interesting Reddit thread about fucking god damn it, what is the name of that? The zombie show that just ended with the fungus zombies, Last of Us.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I saw a thread about Last of Us. Oh, no, it wasn't a fucking thread. It was an email from the Universal Life Church, where I actually am an ordained minister, technically.
Okay. Anyway.
No, I am, remember?
No, I remember. What did the
I
email say?
ordained so that I could officiate my sister's wedding.
Yeah. It's cheap and easy.
It was great. I just like robbed my whole fucking speech from Yoda. I was like, it's the energy that binds us all together. It's in this rock. And it was great.
You
And I
threw
was a sobby bitch. And then later, like, I just busted my dick out to piss down the hill. And apparently that was a funny story that like Doug told later, our mutual friend Doug.
Mhm.
But like, I just remember fucking my brother-in-law's fucking cousin, who's like an evangelical from Tennessee, being pissed because I was just like fucking hammered, and I'm just like, oh, I'm just peeing. And then I saw her walking up the road, and rather than being like, oh, I'm so embarrassed, I'm taking a piss, I just kind of like did a quarter rotation to like out of modesty. But then she said something, and I turned over my shoulder and started talking to her, and it was like, oh my god, this dude's fucking talking to me with his dick out. But like,
what do you want?
what do you want? You talk to me with my dick out. I'm like, I didn't do that shit.
Just returning the favor. That can be your cult. The cult of talking with your dick out. Carrying on.
I'm tempted for the Church of Fonts, though. I think we can definitely incorporate a Church of Fonts like motif, even if it's just like in our fucking temple space, like just a bit of stained glass, like Church of the Fonts. Sorry, go ahead.
Hey. That one I agree with. It's already like that. Like, It's so frustrating, the inaccurate predictions that have been given for the last couple of weeks. And it seems to me because it's like something that doesn't happen very often, and they're just kind of reading their instruments and doing their best. But yeah,
100%, 100%. I really wish that we could have spent more time diving deep into each of those. Because I think each of them does like raise interesting questions about like what does the future look like and what kinds of things do we rely on that won't necessarily be reliable in short term. I definitely appreciate being able to have that conversation.
Yep.
And we talk about things like collapse and surviving the apocalypse, and we push back too, right? Like you pushed back quite a bit. I don't believe that. You said
yeah,
absolutely 100%. I don't necessarily agree 100% with all of it. I do, depending on the time scale, and really, that's
most
in
of
my
it.
opinion, really where things have gone wrong, right? Is that we've taken like a human scale kind of melded with like a cosmic scale way of thinking about the world, and we've turned it into a machine that we're manipulating on a minute to minute basis. And civilization, as they say, is a heat engine. All we do is turn living systems, like take concentrated energy and accelerate. We were talking about accelerationism just the other day. And I was watching some other things talking about it in terms of civilization being a heat engine, which you could be like, oh yeah, we burn fossil fuels so we produce waste heat, right? Like, no, but really, like human civilization is a heat engine in the sense that like we take complex systems and break them apart and throw them into the universe as fucking waste heat.
Right. And in order to do that, we actually need to take uncomplex things first and make them complex.
We have to figure out how to complexify. That's a fantastic way of putting it, actually. Yeah. Are you going to play this clip on Bronze Age collapse?
You want me to?
Sure. We're going to watch a little clip about Bronze Age collapse and who survives. We're not going to offer a lot of commentary on it because it is our terminus. It's our time to go.
The countryside was devastated, but in comparison to the wasteland, where clans could spend generations fighting over access to a well, the depopulated rubble of the old world would have appeared as if the gates of heaven had opened up. Now they had much better things to squabble over, like gold, wine, slaves, and prestige. Where mass irrigated fields of grains had once stood, there was more than enough wild grasses growing for sheep to have a hearty meal or two. Because of this, pastoral nomads thrived after the collapse, and their way of life became the dominant lifestyle almost everywhere in the Near East. Because those living in the wasteland lived such a hard life before the collapse, things actually got easier for them when civilization did collapse. They were such effective survivors that the surviving city dwellers couldn't compete with their ravenous and resilient nature, and most simply lacked the skill set necessary to survive. And as the sheep population grew, so did the population of those who ate them, especially the Arameans. Because of their mobile nature, the Assyrians found it nearly impossible to stamp them out with conventional military means. Assyrian kings frequently boasted of wiping the Arameans off the face of the earth. Then, a few years later, they would boast of
conventional means.
And then a few years later, they would boast about again wiping them off the face of the map. Which is kind of the point, is that like they were confident that they could get rid of them. We do not need to watch Dr. Guy McPherson, by the way.
Okay.
I am ready to go at 11 o'clock 4 minutes ago.
Okay.
That's why I was trying to wrap it, and then you just started playing a clip.
Hey, when the universe it ends with thunderous entropy.
It does end with thunderous entropy, but my point being is that like it's a really good point. It's like the people who lived on the fringe of society are the ones who survive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if like all of us, if there was like an EMP blast, who do you think is probably going to be the least affected by that? Hobo under a bridge, bro.
Amish, they've already got a society that didn't need any of this shit to
Amish?
begin with. Yeah. Mennonites, etc.
Fucking crazy ass cultists and fucking
Native Americans. Ooh.
I know. Most Native Americans are fucking on TikTok, bro.
I've seen. That's how they got 150 million people.
God damn it. No, it's cool. Yeah, so like we talked about all these concepts. I really do wish we had a bit more time to talk about Canadian Prepper. I think there's a lot of stuff in there that could warrant probably a fucking pretty big segment on its own if we elaborated. Like clean water. Like why are most people gonna die of fucking dirty water? Because it's a really simple statement. It's clear to us why that is. It might not be clear to other people that like your sanitation systems fail. Like no one's shocking the fucking municipal well anymore. Right? And like, oh, there's fucking mass grave there because some fucking Nazis killed some people. Might contaminate the well. You don't know.
Yeah, probably will.
Probably will. All we know is that when Liberty dies, it dies.
With thunderous applause. Good night.
With thunderous applause. Bye-bye, my friend. Bye-bye, everybody.
Later.
Oh.
That's my line.